What's up guys, and welcome to today's video and the second episode of our new series called The Haunted 50, where we talk about and explore the most haunted, paranormal, and downright creepy places across the United States, with today's episode focusing on the state of Virginia and places such as Crawford Road, the Exchange Hotel, the Cold Harbor Battlefield, and a place that will forever be known for having a female stranger, which we'll talk about more later in the video. So without further ado, let's dive right into today's video and the most haunted places in Virginia. First on the list is a 3.6 mile road from York County to Newport News, known as the Devil's Highway or Crawford Road. And while just talking about a road and seeing a road to any normal person may not seem significant enough to be on the list, when you start diving into the history about the road and seeing some of the things that's happened on it, you'll understand why it ended up on the list. And if you guys watched the first video or any of my other videos, you guys probably know that I'm very interested in the history of things. So I tried to find the history and when this road first started being used or when it was made, and I actually couldn't find anything about it. So after spending a decent amount of time, I couldn't find anything. But I did find some of the places around it and when they were made, and one of those things was the historic Enview House, which was built in 1769. And the two towns close to it, which I mentioned before, which is Newport News and Yorktown, were founded in 1896 and 1691. So while we can't get an exact date of when the road first started being used, we can see that and kind of infer that it was probably around this time. And with all that in mind, let's talk about why Crawford Road ended up as one of the most haunted places in Virginia, with one of those reasons being its proximity to Yorktown, which has witnessed a lot of deaths both in the Revolutionary War and Civil War. And because of all these wars happening and all the deaths from it, we can, like I said, infer that they were probably using this road during the wars. And because of this, people have seen and even heard soldiers fighting in the woods, running around, gunshots, and all kinds of weird things. But these gunshots become even more concerning when you look at some of the history behind this place past the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. And like I said, these gunshots may not be spirits because a lot of bodies have been found on this road or just right off of it. This includes murders, SAs, and all kinds of things that occurred on the road. And here's just some of the names that are included with that, which are Jimmy Johnson, Austin Baxley, Tanya Lane, Eric Newsbit, Sean Maybury, Jonathan Barron, and even more. And an article written by the Ghost Bull stated that over the past 30 years, tons of bodies and skeletal remains have been found on or near the road. And one of the many deaths that have occurred on the road is a young woman who, during her wedding day, decided that she no longer wanted to get married. And many of the people in her family, like leading up to her wedding, realized that things kind of weren't how they were supposed to be, and she wasn't acting normal. So on her wedding day, she would end up running away and would make her way to Crawford Road and the bridge that goes over Crawford Road. Once here, she would go to the top of the bridge and commit sewer slide and hang from the bridge. And to this day, people have still seen her body hanging from there. Some have been driving under it and seen it just fall, or people walking on the road have seen it just hanging there. And because of all these deaths and the bride and all of these other things, it's made a huge hotspot for paranormal activity that not only affects people walking on the road, but especially cars that drive down the road. And because there are so many weird things that's happened on it, I've kind of made a list that I'm going to list off. With one of those being that when people get close to the bridge, they will see, like I said, the young bride either walk across the bridge or be hanging from the bridge. And a lot of other ones have, like I said, mentioned driving, with people saying as soon as they turn on the road, their CD players will either mess up or the volume will go way up, or they'll turn on the road and their headlights will stop working. And as soon as they turn off the road, their headlights will start working automatically and be perfectly fine. Or their CD player will start working fine and it won't be acting weird at all anymore. And there was also another story that I found where a person mentioned that they were driving down the road, and once they got under the bridge, something hit their car. And they got out of the car, obviously, like anyone did or would, and saw that nothing was there. So they got back in the car and drove off. And what makes it even crazier is when they got back in the car, they saw handprints on their windows all over the car. So that's just another layer that just adds on to everything. And also my fish just moved and it kind of scared me. And on top of all these things, I was also able to find a personal account from a Reddit user named CatReed83, who is a local to the area. And she talked about a story where she would end up visiting the bridge at 2:30 a.m. And she was actually visiting to take pictures. So she pulled up and turned her car off and got out of her car and made sure that her headlights were off so she could take the best pictures. And she started hearing footsteps. And looking around, she saw nothing. And she just thought she was going crazy because, like we all do, we sometimes think we hear something, but we just get in our head. And because of this, she decided to just keep taking pictures. And to get the perfect shot of the bridge, she decided to lay down on her stomach and just get that perfect angle of what she thought would be the best picture of the bridge. So she's laying on her stomach, and after taking the picture, she decides to walk back to her car. And while she was walking back, she actually heard the footsteps running at her. So she ran to her car and got in, but her car wouldn't start. And she was actually able to turn it on and roll up her window just in time to where she saw a man standing in her headlights. So she drove away as fast as she could, and the man jumped on his bike and started following her. Because of all those things, and especially that story, I highly suggest you guys not to visit Crawford Road. And if you do, be very careful, because not only of that just random man following that woman, but all the other crazy things that happen there, it kind of sounds like there may be a murderer that uses the remoteness of this road to their advantage. So just be careful if you do decide to visit the road. Moving on to the next location, we find ourselves in Gordonsville, Virginia, and the Exchange Hotel, which according to the History Channel and A&E is the 15th most haunted place in America. So that's already pretty crazy. And looking at the history of this building, we can see that it was built in 1860 at the intersection of two railroads. Hence the name Exchange Hotel, because it was at the exchange of the Virginia Central Railroad and the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. And when it first opened, it was one of the nicest hotels at the time, with a room costing you $1.27 per night, or today it would cost you $37 a night, which is a crazy good deal for a nice hotel. The hotel had 8 rooms, and they were available for families or women wanting to spend the night. If you were a single male trying to spend the night at the hotel, you'd have to end up staying at the bar. But good times wouldn't last forever, and this was due to its proximity to the railroad and the Civil War starting. And because of its prime location, they would actually end up converting it into, oh my gosh, my fish scared me again. They would actually end up converting it into a hospital. And because of this is where a lot of the hauntings began. And like I said, because of its prime location, if someone was injured in the war, they'd be loaded on a train and brought back to the exchange to where the person could be unloaded and hopefully brought back to health. Which, when I kind of tell you the numbers in a few minutes or a few seconds, you'll understand that like it actually was a really good hospital. When the hotel started being taken over by the government and being converted into a hospital, they also took 125 acres around the hospital. They would put hundreds of cots and beds all the way around this land so that they could facilitate a lot of different people. And at its peak, the hospital could care for around 1,000 men at a time. And throughout all of its history of being a hospital, it would actually hold 70,000 men. And like I mentioned earlier, it was actually a really good hospital because out of those 70,000 men, only 700 of them died, which is a crazy number for the time. And as the war came to an end, the hospital was open for another 6 months and then eventually converted back into a hotel. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the different sightings and paranormal things that have been caught around the hotel. And obviously, when we look at the website, we can see that it's 100% haunted because it says so. But anyways, an article by Joanne Domingo mentioned that a cook named Anna is the most prevalent ghost at the hotel. And according to the article, her spirit is still seen to this day and mainly stays to the kitchen where she actually worked when she lived there. Another story surrounding the hotel is about a group of women who would end up visiting the hotel. Here, they would come across a man and have a 15-minute conversation with him. And later, when they talked to staff and other people around the hotel, they would find out that this man was never there. Another spirit well known at the hotel is a little boy, who actually once worked at the hospital when it was open. Here, he would only work for a short amount of time, but even during that time, he would witness like the true horrors of, I guess, life. And because of this and seeing everything he had seen in the war, he actually decided to commit suicide. And to this day, his spirit is still seen, with one encounter including a person who was working at the hotel's actually museum now. So they were working at the museum and they were mopping the floors. And when they would turn around, they would see a little boy's footprints across the floor. And on top of all these things, people have also heard like doors closing, heavy chests closing, and all kinds of other weird things that just no one could explain. From here, we move 148 miles southwest to the St. Albans Sanatorium, which was originally built in 1892 as a Lutheran's boy preparatory school. And the school was actually founded by George W. Miles, who would end up being the first headmaster at the school. And for around 20 years, the boys that went to the school would have very different feelings and emotions about what they had gone through, with some of them saying that it was as good as school could be, like school can only be so good, and others saying that it was actually extremely bad and it was promoting a strong man, which would therefore like promote bullying. And because of this mentality to help create a stronger man and promoting bullying and all these horrible things, it would actually end up causing a lot of the boys to commit suicide or even kill each other to like one up and be the stronger man. And while that's horrible, it would actually end up being something even better in the future when it was turned into a psychiatric infirmary. Here, Dr. John C. King would want to make a better version of an asylum, which is what they all said. And it actually ended up being horrible, like the rest of them. And by 1945, the staff to patient ratio was 48 staff to every 6,509 patients. And this was, like I said, just following the way asylums were. And one of the most like common ways that they treated people at the asylum was hydrotherapy, which sometimes included just putting people in cold water or nice warm water, and other times included wrapping people up like mummies and dipping them in super scalding hot water, and this would actually lead to a lot of patients dying. Because of this, it actually makes the rooms where the hydrotherapy occurred some of the most paranormally active rooms within the asylum. Later, the sanatorium would end up being bought by another medical facility and would be open for another 10 years, and ultimately the doors would close in 2003, and it would be left abandoned for many years. However, this story is crazy, but a man named Tim Gregory would end up buying the sanatorium. And what makes this story crazy is that he was once a patient when it was open. Here, he would work to renovate the sanatorium and create a haunted house for people to go through. As with all the haunted places on the list, and probably all the ones that are going to be on the Haunted 50 series, this place has like doors closing, random footsteps, and all those things, but that's not significant enough to end up on this list and places like the Travel Channel. And the paranormal team's 3:33 a.m. Paranormal have footage of a spirit whispering Deborah or Deborah. On top of this, many other YouTube channels and shows have also been to the sanatorium, where they have been grabbed by spirits, scratched. They've even gotten full body apparition pictures of spirits. And I also feel like this, I guess a lot of paranormal places have specific rooms, but I feel like this sanatorium has more than usual, with rooms such as the rocker room, which has a rocking chair that randomly rocks by itself, or the hydrotherapy rooms where a lot of people end up dying. Those rooms are kind of the most haunted and paranormal places at the sanatorium. Now in Alexandria, Virginia, we find our place with Josh's review saying that they have the best tasting restaurant style meatloaf he's ever had. Or in other words, we're now at the Gadsby's Tavern. And the history behind this building started when John Wise would end up putting the money together to help build the building in 1785. He would ultimately build it in a Georgian colonial style, and in total the tavern would have 7 rooms, and by 1792 the tavern would also have a hotel added to it. Eventually a man named John Gadsby would end up leasing just the tavern from Mr. Wise, and that would end up happening in 1794. And later John Gadsby would also end up renting the hotel as well. By 1808 and 1815, neither of these men were in the picture anymore, and the hotel and tavern were going through many hands and was passed through many different owners. But in 1926, the American Legion Post number 24 bought the building, and they worked along with the locals to help preserve it and keep it the way it is today. Before I go into the details about the paranormal activity that's actually at the hotel, I first wanted to say some more kind of historic facts about the place, with one of those being that George Washington had held many balls there, and even held one of the meetings that would lead to the first Constitutional Convention, and many other important presidents and celebrities have also stayed at the hotel. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the most famous spirit at the place, which is the female stranger. Her story begins in 1816 when her and her husband would come from the West Indies and would end up checking into the hotel and be given room 8. And not long after checking in, a doctor would be called to the hotel. And here he would go to room 8 and see the woman, and apparently she was super sick, and the doctor was like, there's nothing I can do. There's no way I can fix her. And the doctor really didn't know what was wrong with her. And ultimately, the woman would end up dying. From here, the man would end up borrowing $1,500 from a man in town. And as soon as he could, he would bury her and leave town as quickly as possible. And this whole thing and this whole mystery of why they came to town and all that stuff becomes even weirder because of what he had written on her headstone, which reads, to the memory of a female stranger. This stone was placed here by her disconsolate husband. And to this day, the female stranger is still seen in the windows and the halls of Gadsby's Tavern, often being seen in a 19th century like gown or dress and with a candle in her hand, with people throughout the years like seeing her either while there's a party going on or just walking the halls, with one of those stories including a man who would end up seeing a woman dressed up in a 19th century gown during a party. And because of this, he would end up deciding to approach her and try to talk to her. But the woman would end up walking away. And he kind of, I don't know if he saw it as a challenge or whatever, he decided to start following her and just followed her all the way to room number 8, where she would go into the door and he would knock on the door for a while and nothing would end up happening. And eventually he would get staff to come and check on the room. And this story is super weird that like the staff and this guy followed her to the room. I think that's the creepiest part of the story. But he would end up getting into the room and there was no one in the room. Staff said no one had the room like reserved that night. And the only thing in the room was a lit candle. And yeah, the creepiest thing about that story is the man following her to her room. But I guess, I don't know. Whatever. Last on the Haunted 50 list for Virginia is the Cold Harbor Battlefield. And to be honest, this one was kind of difficult to kind of summarize or talk about in a video, just because there's so much to the Civil War, obviously. So I'm just kind of trying to explain it as best as I can and provide details where I can and kind of hope that you guys can fill in the rest. And I don't know, I'm just really interested in history, so let's talk about it. So the whole battle that actually ended up happening on this piece of land would happen over the course of 13 days, where Confederate and Union soldiers fought, and a lot of the fight, or the main part of the fight, would actually end up happening on the 3rd of June. And this was actually like the most bloody, it was just a horrible battle, and a lot of casualties would end up coming from this battle. But before we can like actually start getting into the battle itself, we first need to add some context to the situation. And with that, we start on May 31st of 1864. And at this time, years of battle have already taken place, and Union troops would actually be heading towards Richmond, Virginia. They would do this to gain more land during the war. And along the way, General Robert E. Lee on the Confederate or south side of the war, and after a small battle further north, General Ulysses S. Grant, I can't say that name right for some reason, but whatever, on the Union or north side of the war, moved towards Old Cold Harbor, or which will be known as Cold Harbor Battlefield in the future. And once there, his troops would actually stumble across General Fitzhugh, a Confederate general, which caused a battle to start. And during this battle, the Confederate soldiers would actually be pushed back by the Union, and this would lead us to June 1st, where General Lee told the Confederate troops to try to take back Old Cold Harbor. However, this would fail and give leader Grant confidence to try to take back more of the land and try to take as much land as he possibly could. And with Union reinforcements arriving, troops headed towards where the Confederates were stationed. With fighting starting around 5 p.m., the Union soldiers were actually able to push back the Confederates, but around nightfall, they would end up failing because of counterattacks. Then on June 2nd, more battles were planned, but it wouldn't end up happening because of how tired the troops were from the days before. So General Grant would allow his men and gave the order to the men to just take a break so they could end up having a battle the next day. But this would also give the other side time to regain strength as well. And with the time that they had, they didn't just sit around, and instead they helped build trenches and regained a lot of the strength and built a pretty good defense so that Grant's troops couldn't get through whenever they decided to stop taking a break. And by June 3rd, and as I mentioned before, the most brutal day of the battle would end up starting around 4:30 a.m. with 50,000 Union troops from multiple corps rushing through and towards the Confederates. And they thought that they had that down packed, but because the Confederate had created this good defense wall and been spending the time creating that defense, they actually weren't able to rush past and get the upper leg that they thought they could. So very quickly, thousands of Union troops would end up dying. And because they were pretty much just at a halt there at where the Confederates had built their wall and defensive area, they were just stuck there. And they started digging trenches wherever they could. So Union soldiers were dying by the hundreds and using anything they could, from cups to their guns to anything they could find to dig a trench and get out of the way of the fire from the Confederates. And by nightfall, they would end up using these makeshift trenches for a few days. And between June 4th and June 12th, there was a series of events that took place, but nothing really ended up happening too much. They were kind of waiting, both sides were kind of waiting for the other to make a move, and all of the people wounded on the battlefield were just stuck there during this period. And by June 12th, Union forces would end up calling it and leaving the battle. And this showed that they had not only lost both from a perspective of giving up, but also from a perspective of losing land and all the casualties that they lost during that little battle that took place. And by the end of it, around 17,332 casualties were recorded. And this number is a little confusing because it includes the deaths, those lost in battle, those injured, and those that were captured by the other side, with 12,737 of those being Union soldiers and 4,595 being Confederate soldiers, which both sides, that's a crazy number. And the key word there was recorded. So there's probably a lot more that wasn't recorded, and that's just the ballpark number that they could get during the time. And due to the large number of casualties and everything else that had taken place at the battlefield, it is known as an extremely large paranormal hotspot, and a lot of things have been seen and documented here on the field, with people visiting saying that they've heard soldiers talking, running, they've heard gunshots, they've heard horses running, they've heard cannons, and some have even said that they felt cannons fire, like the pressure change from them firing. Others have said that they've smelt gunpowder from the guns that were being fired. All kinds of just weird things that just are out of the ordinary that usually wouldn't happen. And on top of this, people have also seen soldiers walking around, and especially they'll see them walk and just form out of the smoke or disappear in the smoke. Just all kinds of weird things. With a lot of the locals saying that the best time to see something happen in this area being 1 a.m. because a lot of the apparitions and weird things start happening around this time. And what I thought was crazy is that when you look at the scope of the battle that took place, it was actually around 7,500 acres. And that was the total size of the battlefield. And only a small majority of that now doesn't have something on it. And most of it has been developed into businesses, houses, apartments, all kinds of things. So what was once a battlefield and once where thousands of men had died is now just houses. And that just, I don't know if that's crazy to you guys, but that's crazy to me. So I wonder how many people know their house is sitting on was once a deadly battleground, or how many of those places that are on the battlefield experience some kind of paranormal activity. Thank you guys for watching today's video and the second part of the Haunted 50 series. If you guys want to see more of my content and want to see maybe your state in the future, please hit the subscribe button and let me know what states you want me to do next. And also, if you guys have any personal stories of these places or have any places that you think are more haunted than these, let me know in the comments as well, and I might make a dedicated video to those places if I find them interesting enough. So, thank you guys again for watching today's video, and I'll see you next episode. Peace out.